The ending of the 2024 remake of Roadhouse differs slightly from the original movie, as Dalton meets a new fate and there are a few surprising villain twists, but the underlying themes of guilt and the cycle of violence are still the same. Like the 1989 original, the Roadhouse remake revolves around a notorious bouncer named Dalton who's hired to break up fights and fend off corporate gentrification at a rundown roadhouse bar in a small town. The businessman brings in a ruthless henchman, who turns out to be a formidable opponent, to take down Dalton. While the plot is the same, the details have been changed. Patrick Swayze's Dalton took a job in Missouri, whereas Jake Gyllenhaal's Dalton heads to the Florida Keys. Swayze's Dalton is haunted by ripping out a man's throat in self-defense, whereas Gyllenhaal's Dalton is haunted by an illegal beating in his past UFC career. The Roadhouse remake follows the same story beats as the original movie, give or take, but it has a totally different ending, a slightly less optimistic and happily ever after ending, that digs deeper into the themes that the original only touched on briefly. Dalton's fate in Roadhouse explained, why he leaves town. Dalton on a bus in Roadhouse 2024. At the end of the Roadhouse remake, despite driving the bad guys out of town and winning the respect and admiration of the locals, Dalton leaves Glass Key on the same Greyhound bus that brought him there in the first place. Dalton leaves town because peace has finally been restored in Glass Key, and with all the bitter enemies that Dalton has out in the world, he could jeopardize that tranquility by sticking around. Rather than settling down in Glass Key, Dalton will seek out a different town that needs his help and liberate them from their own enemies. Why Knox killed Brandt in Roadhouse's ending. Knox stands over Brandt's corpse in Roadhouse 2024. The climactic fight sequence in the controversial Roadhouse remake comes with a shocking twist as the main villain kills the secondary villain. For most of the movie, the sadistic Knox and his wealthy employer Ben Brandt have been teaming up against Dalton. Brandt is paying Knox to kill Dalton and Knox spends most of the movie focused on fulfilling that obligation. But in the final showdown at the bar, Knox turns around and breaks Brandt's neck, killing him, before turning his sights on Dalton. Knox doesn't kill Brandt for some complex, Machiavellian reason. He's not trying to usurp Brandt's fortune or take over his business. Knox isn't smart or ambitious enough to pull off a scheme like that, he's just a violent psychopath. In the end, he just gets sick of Brandt and snaps his neck so he won't have to listen to him anymore. Ben Brandt's full plan in Roadhouse 2024 explained. Brandt with shaving cream on his face in Roadhouse 2024. When Brandt first appears on his yacht and sends his henchmen after Dalton, it's not 100% clear what he wants or what his plan is to get it. But midway through the movie, Frankie explains it all to Dalton. Brandt wants to tear down some small businesses in Glass Key so he can build a resort for the rich. The Roadhouse is the last holdout, so Brandt is doing everything in his power to get the bar closed, like sending troublemakers to harass the new bouncer. Frankie hired Dalton in a last-ditch effort to defeat Brandt. Who got the money in Roadhouse and why it's so important? A suitcase full of cash in Roadhouse 2024. The main MacGuffin in the Roadhouse remake is a bag of money that Dalton stole from Brandt. Brandt ramps up his campaign against Dalton and kidnaps his love interest, Ellie, in an attempt to get the money back, but Dalton never gives it to him. At the end of the movie, Dalton doesn't keep the money for himself, he leaves the money for Charlie to help her restore her father's bookstore, which was destroyed by the bad guys. This is important, because it highlights Dalton's selflessness while he's questioning whether or not he's a hero. Knox's survival twist in Roadhouse's mid-credit scene explained. Knox still alive at the end of Roadhouse 2024. At the end of the Roadhouse remake, after Dalton has stabbed Knox over and over again and he stops moving, Knox seems to have died. However, the film's surprising mid-credit sequence reveals that Knox somehow survived his many stab wounds. He's seen causing chaos at the hospital where he's recovering before storming out of the front door. Knox isn't the kind of guy to forgive and forget, so he'll likely seek vengeance against Dalton, which could be explored in a sequel if this well-reviewed reimagining of Roadhouse is lucky enough to get a sequel greenlit. How Roadhouse 2024's ending compares to the 1989 original. The ending of the Roadhouse remake is slightly different than the original 1989 movie. In both the original and the remake, Dalton manages to defeat the villains and drive the corporate interests away, leaving the town in the safe hands of the locals. Whereas the finale of the remake takes place at the Roadhouse bar itself, the original film's finale is set on the businessman's estate. In the original, Dalton stops short of killing the businessman, who then aims at Dalton's back and gets shot dead by locals. In the remake, the businessman is killed by his own henchmen.